shortly. The proceeding will start 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 shortly. The proceeding will start.
Order. Tonia Antoniazzi to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered E-petition 641904 relating to the next general election. It is an honour to serve under your chairship, Mr Dowd, and I am pleased to introduce this petition and give voice to its hundreds of thousands of petitioners, as well as pretty much everybody I've spoken to recently regarding the current state of this country. The petition calls for an immediate general election in light of the chaos of the current government. It is clear in its demand The Prime Minister should call an immediate general election to allow the British public to have their say on how we are governed. We should not have to wait until January 2025. It goes on to explain, consistent opinion polling has shown that the British public has lost confidence in the current government. The NHS is in crisis, the asylum system is broken, there are delays at the ports and institutions are failing. The British people should be given a say on what to do next. I pay tribute to David Nash, who started the petition. Over 286,000 people have signed this petition, 383 of them my constituents in Gower, and the number is climbing as we speak. This certainly demonstrates the strength of feeling of dissatisfaction and dismay at the government and the turmoil we find ourselves in as a country. This dismay is not new. Members will be aware that this is not the first petition or debate, for that matter, of its kind. Opened by the Right Honourable Member for Newcastle upon Tyne North, this hall hosted a discussion in October 2022 on a similar petition, which received almost 1 million signatures. The fact that this is the second debate in less than 18 months on an immediate general election is about as strong an indicator as one can get of just how much this governing party has lost the respect of the British people. Let's remind ourselves of the situation surrounding the last debate. Inflation had reached a 41% high. Families were confronting a cost of living crisis and unaffordable energy bills. And there were record backlogs in our NHS. After becoming the fourth Conservative Prime Minister in 6 years, solely on votes from the Conservative Party members, whose backing represented just 0.17% of all voters, the Right Honourable Member for South West Norfolk had delivered a mini-budget that caused complete market turmoil and led to further havoc with U-turns, reversals and the sacking of the then-Chancellor. Fast forward to now. The only thing that has changed is the government's figurehead. Despite a new Prime Minister and promises of a new direction, chaos persists and continues to govern as matters are getting even worse for the country. This fact is glaringly obvious to just about everyone other than the Prime Minister, who is so out of touch he continues to tell the public just how good they've got it as they feel the country burning around them everywhere they turn. British people continue to pay the price of the Conservatives' catastrophic mini-budget, delivered with absolutely no mandate from the British people, that triggered an economic meltdown and saw the pound plummet to its lowest level against the dollar in 37 years. At the time, the National Institute of Economic and Social Research said that the uncertainty caused by the fiscal event was directly pushing up longer-term borrowing costs, and they were right. Interest rates soared and families were forced to cope with higher mortgages, with the average mortgage being up £240 a month. That's on top of the cost of living crisis, which continues to exert enormous pressure on families as they face higher food and energy bills. The mini-budget shows the catastrophic consequences of behaving recklessly with the economy. But the extent of the Conservative government's economic damage goes beyond this one disastrous event. The government has presided over a period of national decline. We have had 11 growth plans from 7 chancellors, and yet economic growth is stagnant. Under the Conservative government, GDP growth has averaged 1.5% per year. This year, we are forecast to be the slowest growing economy in the whole of the G7. National debt is now at the highest level since the 1960s and has more than doubled since 2010. Experts predict this will be the biggest tax raise in Parliament on record. There have been 25 Tory tax rises since the last election. And even after this month's tax changes, the average household is still set to be up to £1,200 worse off. 14 years of economic failure is having a devastating impact on the people of this country, with taxes eating into wages, mortgages rising, interest rates and inflation high, and prices in shops still going up. Too many families, Mr. Chair, are struggling to make ends meet. This Parliament is on track to be the first in modern history where living standards in this country have actually contracted. Household income growth is down by 3.1%. A report published by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation just last week found that 14.4 million people were in poverty in 21-22. 22% of people in the United Kingdom. Just let that number sink in. This included 8.1 million working-age adults, 4.2 million children and 2.1 million pensioners. This is completely unacceptable. The economic damage caused by this government is leaving British people worse off, and it is most acutely felt by our most vulnerable in society. Increasing numbers of children and pensioners are residing in poverty as this government presides with no public mandate or democratic accountability for the policies they seek to pursue. Whilst we have the biggest tax burden since the Second World War, public services are crumbling. Never before has a British government asked its people to pay so much for so little. Schools are reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, the RAC. These are literally falling down. And a head teachers' union just last week warned that parents are taking their children out of those schools as a result. The RAC concrete failure is just one issue affecting schools in England. According to a National Audit Office report last year, 700,000 children are being taught in unsafe or ageing buildings. The NHS is in crisis after over a decade of government mismanagement. With waiting lists totalling over 7.6 million, 1 in every 7 people in England are on NHS waiting lists, more than ever before. These people have put their lives on hold while they wait in pain and discomfort for months or even years. The Conservative government cut 2,000 GPs, and now patients find it impossible to get an appointment. Patients are waiting dangerously long for ambulances, and it's now very common for them to queue outside hospitals for hours on end in order to hand over patients. The latest NHS England analysis figures revealed that 420,000 patients would have to wait 12 hours or more in A&E last year, a 20% increase on 2022. Now, I know this sounds like a dystopian-esque nightmare, but it is, alarmingly, the reality of the current situation. Healthcare should be available for all who require it, but 14 years of Conservative failure means people can no longer trust that the NHS will be there for them in their hour of need. I could go on about how this government has broken the asylum system, failed to clear the asylum backlog and end asylum hotel use, how they have spent 400 million of public money on a discredited, unworkable and immoral Rwanda plan without sending a single asylum seeker there, or, despite their promises of being tough on crime, I could expand on how this government are failing on law and order, with over 90% of crimes going unsolved. Only 3.9% of sexual offences, 2.4% of which are rapes, resulting in a charge or summons, and record high fatal stabbings as knife crime has soared 77% since 2015. I will leave these to a mention, as I'm conscious of time already spent in outlining this government's failures. All this Conservative government has to show for themselves is complete and utter chaos. They have overseen the degradation of standards in public life. 6 by-elections were held last year, with a further 2 expected next month. After 5 Prime Ministers and 7 Chancellors, the public are worse off. Granted, we live in a parliamentary democracy, and it's not the first time that Prime Minister has changed in the middle of a parliament. But we are now on our 3rd Prime Minister since the last general election in 2019, the 2 of which were replaced by Conservative MPs and members rather than the electorate. That is discouraging for the British people, who have had no say in the direction of their governance or who their Prime Minister is. During the previous debate on a similar petition back in October 2022, the concerns were rightly raised on the then Prime Minister's lack of a mandate, who was elected solely by the Conservative Party members. This member then went on to claim the title of the shortest-serving Prime Minister this country has ever seen, after triggering an enormous economic crisis. So I think to say that the member's concerns were definitely well-founded. But I want to highlight that our current Prime Minister has even less of a mandate to govern. He failed his own party's leadership contest and is now failing at serving the interests of the public. Indeed, a recent YouGov poll puts the government's disapproval rating at 66%. Perhaps he might have been more successful at engaging the public elsewhere. If he does choose to call an immediate general election, he'll have plenty of time to prepare for a starring role in I'm a Celebrity. It is no wonder that the Prime Minister cannot command the confidence of his country, given his inability to secure the assurances of his own party. And as a teacher myself, he's like a supply teacher in charge of an unruly class. Stand up and fight, a phrase repeated by the Leader of the House 19 times in a speech to the Tory conference, 12 of them in quick succession. She didn't mean for her party's MPs to fight each other. Signatories of this petition are expressing their anger at a governing party at war with itself, more focused on their infighting psychodrama than meaningfully tackling the multiple crises that they lurch this country to and from. The recent developments regarding steel are a prime example. The future of Port Talbot Steelworks is integral to communities across South Wales and so many of my constituents. The Conservative government spent £500 million of taxpayers' money only to make thousands redundant and leave us unable to make our own primary steel. They continue to refuse to engage with the First Minister of Wales to discuss the matter, demonstrating nothing but callous indifference to the thousands of workers, my constituents included, whose livelihoods are at stake thanks to this government's incompetence. And don't forget, Mr Chair, the bigger picture. Those that work in the supply chain, the local economy, even those that work on the tugboats bringing the ships in to port, those people's lives and livelihoods are affected. For too many people, it can be hard to remember a time when government politicians could be trusted to act with the public's interests and to a standard expected for public life. Indeed, in these unprecedented times, the only thing that seems certain is the persistence of chaos from our governing party. The country's fed up and deserves better than this mayhem with no mandate. I remember, Mr Chair, while I got into politics, as a single mother at the time of the Tory Lib Dem coalition. It hit me then as a school teacher. It hit me then in 2010. But it's no wonder our public servants, after being ignored for 14 years, feel how they feel today. The petitioners' ask is clear: to be given the opportunity to have their say on how they want this country to be governed. The legislation is clear, Mr Chair, that the current Parliament must be dissolved no later than 5 years after it first met, which places the deadline for dissolution on the 17th of December 2024. Any decision to dissolve sooner and call an early election is at the discretion of the Prime Minister. Or failing that, government members can join with opposition members to put things right. The Prime Minister has already indicated a willingness for an early general election in ruling one out to take place in January 2025. Having outlined the current state of this country, it can be hard to imagine how things could possibly get any worse. Sound familiar? We've been here before, and it is becoming increasingly clear that the longer the government delays giving people their say, the further damage their incompetence will inflict on this country. Recent polling by Delta Poll for the Mirror at the beginning of January found that half of the public and even 38% of Conservative voters say that they want an election by the end of the spring. Only 12% like the sound of the Prime Minister's working assumption of an election in the second half of the year. Members of Parliament have a duty to the public to govern in the national interest. In this vein, will the Minister say when the public will have a chance to decide who should lead us going forward? Will the government act in line with the interests of the British people and their own voters and call for an immediate general election? Whichever government is elected, Mr Chair, they will at least have the support of the public and the mandate to govern. The Prime Minister is attempting to inspire the Tory party faithful by pitching himself as a change candidate. His party has been in power for 14 years. It is true that in the time they have faced some very difficult external factors, including the pandemic and Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. However, this government has only mishandled responses to them and have consistently made political choices with the lack of a clear mandate that has made things so much worse. They've got no right to claim that they have the solutions to the problems they created themselves. The petition calls on the government to put an end to the chaos and uncertainty by giving the people their say. Mr Chair, it is time for the government to put the national interests first.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered E-petition 641904 relating to the next general election. Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Mr Dowd. I wasn't expecting to get called quite so early. I thought there would be many more people that would be keen to come in on this debate. Thank you very much for chairing this debate today, and thank you to the Petitions Committee, and particularly the member for Gower, who led this debate so masterfully and covered a huge amount of issues that have been happening and reasons behind those petitioners signing the petition. When I first got involved in party politics and I first joined the SNP in 2001, when we were first out canvassing and campaigning, it was not unusual for us to knock on doors of people and for them to say, "I'm not sure who I'm voting for." And the people were inevitably, in some circumstances, voting Tory, but they were too shy to tell us because they were embarrassed about voting Tory. That was quite a common thing back then. That was quite a common thing for a significant number of years. And then you had the Lib Dem Tory coalition, and there was a bit more optimism in there around the Conservatives, and people were actually willing to say and to admit to us that they were voting Conservative. Well, Mr Dowd, it has disappeared again. We now have all of these people who, you know, there are, believe it or not, some people in Aberdeen North who do vote Conservative. In fact, they did come second in the last election in Aberdeen North. People who are pretty definitely going to vote Conservative, but they're now too embarrassed to say that they're going to vote Conservative because they're looking at the situation down here. They're looking at what is happening in Westminster, and they're unwilling to actually admit that that is the party that they are going to vote for. Mr Dowd, there are so many issues, it's difficult to pack them into a small speech, but I'll try and cover a few of them. Firstly, as was masterfully covered by the member from Gower, around household bills, around inflation, around energy bills, it is the case that this UK government has failed to do enough. When they're standing up talking about the fact that inflation has dropped, the prices are still going up. We still have inflation. We still have potatoes and pasta and rice and the most basic foodstuffs that people cannot avoid buying have massively increased in price. You cannot avoid buying some of those essentials, and they are still continuing to increase in price. I don't know, Mr Dowd, how often you buy butter or margarine, but it is twice the price that it used to be just a couple of short years ago. And again, that's a staple. Again, that's something that people need to have. Fats in your diet. You need to have all sorts of different foods included in your diet. If the prices keep going up, which they are because inflation continues to go up, then it gets even worse and people can no longer afford to buy things. And that's without the energy prices that they're now paying, and the UK government refusing to put in another energy rebate for people, despite the fact that they know that folk cannot afford to live right now. I have been in elected politics since 2007, and this is the least optimism that I have ever seen. Before, when people would come to you, and they would come to you with money problems, they would come to you because they were struggling, you were quite often able to say to them, "Oh, are you claiming everything that you're supposed to be claiming?" You know, you were able to give them some advice, you were able to give them options. And now the only option that you can give people, because they're already claiming everything they're entitled to, the only option that you can give them is food banks. How is it that we've got to the point in 2024 where the only ray of sunlight for so many families is the fact that they can get a food parcel every so often? It is absolutely unconscionable that we are in this situation. And we are in this situation because of choices that are being made by the Conservative government. I mean, it's just the case that they could make different choices that would allow people to eat, that would allow people to heat their homes, that would allow people to be able to feed their children better. They need to reassess social security and ensure that social security is enough to live on. It is the case that you cannot live on social security. The augmentation of universal credit on people on the lowest wages still does not bring people up to the level that you can live on. It still does not give them enough money to live on. The pretended living wage that is put in by the UK government is, again, not enough to live on. And, you know, people are working all of the hours that they possibly can. They're claiming everything that they possibly can. They may be disabled and unable to work, and they still do not have enough money to live. It is no wonder that people are completely and totally fed up with this situation. In terms of public sector funding and NHS privatisation, you know, a significant amount of the public sector stuff is devolved in Scotland, the NHS is devolved in Scotland, but the reality is that if the UK government continues to squeeze the public sector, if it continues to give less and less money to the public sector, if it continues to privatise parts of the NHS, because of the Barnett formula, that has a significant impact on Scotland's budget. That has a significant impact on the budget that the Scottish Government has, and the Scottish Government cannot borrow in the way that the UK Government can. It has to deliver a balanced budget every year, and it is being constrained by choices that are not our own because of the decision-making processes that are happening in Westminster. All of those decisions to cut public services in the UK, in England and Wales, or in England or in the UK as a whole, have a knock-on impact on Scotland's budgets. They have a knock-on impact on Wales and in Northern Ireland as well. It is ridiculous that we're in a situation that the public sector is being squeezed so much that it's struggling to afford to provide even the basic services. And that's not helped. Neither the NHS nor public sector workloads are helped by the immigration decisions that are being made by the UK government. It is more difficult than it has ever been before to get people to work in care, for example, because of the changes that are being made to immigration. This makes it even more difficult. Aberdeen is the city outside London with the highest percentage of people that are born outside the UK. We've got a massive immigrant population in Aberdeen. London comes first, Aberdeen is second for the percentage of people who are born outside the UK. And we love that. That is brilliant. We have got an immensely multicultural, diverse city. I was at a Hindu event on Saturday night. Aberdeen is vibrant because of this, but it's becoming increasingly difficult because of the UK government's ideological opposition to immigration. It is the case that people in my constituency would rather have care workers to look after them than they would to stamp out immigration. We've got hotels that are run by meres full of asylum seekers in Aberdeen that the UK government doesn't allow to work. I mean, for goodness sake, allow people to work, allow people to contribute to the economy, allow people to contribute to the society that they're living in. It's better for everybody if they're allowed, if they've got an asylum claim in, if they're allowed to work, if they're allowed to contribute, if they're allowed to integrate and become part of the community and provide that support, particularly for our older people in terms of care, for example. The other thing that has happened in relation to democracy and in relation to trust is because of the significant number of Conservative Prime Ministers that you've had, one after the other. I mean, we could almost say it could possibly be a ploy to allow each of them to put a whole bunch of people into the House of Lords and unbalance the House of Lords even more. If you have 5 Conservative Prime Ministers in the course of 8 years, then you get 5 or 6 or who knows how many we might be in by the end of this year. Tranches of people sitting in the House of Lords with a Conservative hat on. Each of those Prime Ministers has been able to put people in there. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Dowd. I'm very grateful to the honourable member. Can she think of a time when a governing party changed Prime Minister twice during a Parliament without going to the country? Because I can't think of a time.
No, I also can't think of a time, and I think it's really shocking that we're in this situation, especially as the member from Gower laid out, with the current Prime Minister not being elected by anyone apart from his constituency. Wasn't even elected by the Conservatives; they didn't want him, and they ended up with him as the second choice there. And yet the people have not had their say. They've not had the opportunity to say, yes, we are happy with this situation, we are happy with the former Prime Minister crashing the economy and our mortgage rates going absolutely through the roof and the UK refusing to cancel VAT on those mortgage rates. They've not had the opportunity to say that. And I think that they would say we're deeply unhappy. We're deeply unhappy and deeply pessimistic about the future. We don't see that there is a ray of sunshine here because the system is broken, because the system continues to be broken. This UK government as well, in the last few years, has done what it can to erode democracy. It has done what it can to ensure that it's more difficult for people to vote. It's put in voter ID, which we vehemently oppose in Scotland. It has done what it can to ensure this. And actually, if you look at the rates of voter fraud, it is not the case that there is voter fraud. What happens in relation to having voter ID just means that people who are less privileged, people who are more disadvantaged, are less likely to be able to take part in democracy, and that suits some of the Conservatives down to the ground. It's completely shocking that we're in this situation. Just a couple of other things to mention. In terms of just transition and climate change, we have got the situation where energy prices are going up. We've got the situation where the UK government is putting through the petroleum licensing bill in order to ensure that there is more licensing of oil and gas fields, which will make absolutely no difference to the prices that people are paying for their energy. It will make absolutely no difference. What it will make a difference to is the profits of those energy companies. That's what it will make a positive difference to. They will have higher profits if they're able to do more exploration and have more fields licensed as a result of those explorations. It takes something like 16 years for a field to come through. So licensing more today is not going to make any difference to the prices that my constituents are paying for their energy. And they're doing this, they're taking these decisions, they're making statements about climate change, about electric cars, for example, in the face of ever-increasing extreme weather events, of ever-increasing climate change that we have, of a situation that the world is not meeting its climate change targets. If you ask young people, this is what they are concerned about. They are concerned about climate change. They're particularly concerned that our political leaders are refusing to concede that it is the most important issue, that it is something that needs to be tackled. The UK government needs to lead from the front, and it is absolutely failing to do so. It should be supporting renewable energy, supporting energies of the future, rather than pouring more time and energy into increasing the amount of fossil fuels that we're getting out of the sea. In terms of the EU membership, we were dragged out of the EU against the will of the people of Scotland, despite being explicitly promised during the Scottish independence referendum that the way to stay part of the EU was to remain as part of the UK, that so many people in Scotland voted no in the Scottish independence referendum because they felt so strongly about the EU and believed what Better Together were telling them. And then, immediately after the 2019 general election, we were taken out of the EU despite every single constituency in Scotland, every single area in Scotland voting to remain in the EU. We have now left the EU. And the negative impact that that has had has been significant. It has had a ratcheting impact on the inflation, for example. It has meant that we are more negatively impacted by those issues, and the Minister will no doubt say it's entirely because of global factors, and it's just not. It has been exacerbated extremely by what has happened in relation to Brexit. I mean, the solution, as has been put forward by this petition, is to have a general election, is to have that general election allow people to have their say. The reality for people in Scotland is that we've also got a lifeboat. We have got a lifeboat that we want to take to get us out of here. We've been asking for an independence referendum. We have been saying we want an independence referendum. We've been making clear that we are utterly fed up with the Westminster system. We are utterly fed up with the decisions that are being taken down here. Even things like the fact that the timing of the general election is entirely in the hands of the Prime Minister, whereas the timing of elections in Scotland are set by statute. They happen on that regular basis, 4 or 5 years, depending on there was a change that needed to take place to realign elections, but it's a 4-year cycle that those elections take place on. Now, it is grim that we end up in this situation and the UK government can just say, no, we don't want to let them have an independence referendum. Doesn't matter how many people in Scotland want independence. It's up to us. We're going to make those decisions on behalf of the people of Scotland, just like they're making so many decisions on behalf of the people of Scotland. But the decisions that they're taking around immigration, the decisions that they're taking around human rights, the decisions that they're taking around climate change, those are not being done in the name of the people of Scotland. They are not being done in our name, and we need the chance to take that lifeboat to get out of here so that we can make our own decisions that are the right decisions for those people who live, who work in Scotland, rather than decisions that are being taken by the Westminster government for whoever it is that they're taking these decisions for, because they're certainly not doing it for the benefit of the general population.
Thank you. Ellie Reeves.
Thank you, Mr Dowd, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And the contributions from my friend, the Honourable Member for Gower, and the Honourable Member for Aberdeen North set out a real sense that across the UK it's time for change. And in my constituency alone, 768 people have signed this petition that we're debating today. You don't have to follow politics closely to see this is a withering government at the end of its days. The sooner the public can have their say, the better. And yet our unelected Prime Minister is too scared to commit to a date for the election, clinging on to power, hoping things will get better. But the writing is on the wall and his party knows it. Just look at the events of the last 3 weeks. A Tory MP resigning over the party's direction. Another senior Tory MP calling on the Prime Minister to stand down. And now we learn there's a group of ex-advisers, Tory donors and rebel MPs in the shadows trying to topple him. No doubt the leadership campaign domain names are already quietly being purchased. Move over for mordant.org, believeinbadenoch.co.uk, bowdown-to-braverman.com. But no matter the leader, the one thing these Tories have in common is that it's party first, country second. For years now, our politics has been held hostage by the factionalism inside the Conservative Party. This chaos is unsustainable and we can no longer afford it. For once, the Conservatives should finally put the country first and call an election. Because people are crying out for change. The mandate for this is clear. Even the Prime Minister knows it. It explains his inability to stick to a strategy as he attempts to match the public mood. This time last year, he was branding himself as Mr. Competent. He was all about delivery. Remember those 5 pledges? Well, the only one he delivered on was the only one that wasn't actually in his control. So then at conference, he switched to Mr. Change, correctly putting forward the argument that the country needs change, but incorrectly and staggeringly putting forward that the answer is 5 more years of Conservatives. And then what did Mr. Change go and do? Hire the former Prime Minister as his Foreign Secretary. So, with the Mr. Change narrative not sticking, what has he now settled on? Mr. Continuity. Stick with me because it's better the devil you know. Well, he'd better call an election soon because at this rate, he's going to run out of new Mr. Men to choose from. But despite the Prime Minister trying to say the answer to the question of change is another 5 years of the Conservatives, we won't be fooled. Just look at the last 14 years. failure on the economy, on the NHS, on tackling crime. None of this would change with a fifth Conservative term. The fact of the matter is they have no right to complain. They have the solutions to the problems they created. Remember, the Conservatives chose, through ideology, to crush the economy with their mini-budget. Families up and down the country are still paying the price through increased mortgages and rents. As we enter the election year, they may masquerade as tax cutters by reducing national insurance, but this is the biggest tax-raising parliament in living memory. For every 10 pence that they've increased on working people's taxes, they are now only giving 2 pence back with their tax gimmick. The average family is set to be £1,200 a year worse off under Sunak's tax plan at the very moment that we're also living through a Tory cost of living crisis. You can look far and wide, but they have no plan for the economy. But the chaos doesn't end here. They've also pushed our NHS onto its knees. They wasted £3 billion on a top-down reorganisation instead of investing in the equipment and technology a modern health service requires. And millions of patients have been waiting 2 weeks or more for a GP appointment. But is that really a surprise, given GP numbers have been cut by 2,000? Overall, across the NHS, waiting lists have hit record levels, and yet the government put their hands up and say it isn't their fault. But it's a simple equation. The longer the Conservatives are in government, the longer patients wait. And sadly, the longer they are in power, the more political chaos we experience. Since 2015, we've had 5 Prime Ministers, 7 Chancellors and 13 Housing Ministers. Government cannot run effectively with this kind of churn. Can you imagine a financial advisor trying to get you to invest in a business that had this kind of turnover in its leadership? You'd run a mile. And that's not even taking into account the misconduct and sleaze we've also seen. £3.5 billion worth of COVID contracts awarded to Tory-linked firms. Tory MPs facing accusations of cash for access and favours. And of course Partygate, showing as clearly as possible that with the Conservatives, it's one rule for them and another for the rest of the country. They have fundamentally broken the trust the public should be able to have in their leaders. Indeed, whilst the economy flatlines, the only thing that continues to grow, aside from NHS waiting lists, is the number of factions of Conservative MPs. They've got the New Conservatives, the No Turning Back Group, the Conservative Growth Group, the European Research Group, the Northern Research Group, and wait for it, the Common Sense Group. Then just last week, we saw the launch of the Popular Conservatism Group, led by a former leader that was so popular they were outlasted by a lettuce. This splintering is endemic of a failed political force. None of them can agree on the direction of their party, let alone the direction of our country. And it's becoming clearer and clearer. The Tories aren't governing for the country. They aren't even pretending to fight for the British people. It's all about their party. It's all about a game for power. Keir Starmer, meanwhile, has changed the Labour Party. He's put it back in the service of working people, a party that is proud, that doesn't take its support for granted and that will always put the country first, a party that has the direction and the hunger to actually effect change. And that is captured in our long-term plan for the country, a plan to turn the page on the last 14 years and change the country for the better, a mission-driven government that can deliver a decade of national renewal, financial stability and strong fiscal rules so we never have a repeat of the disastrous Tory mini-budget, 1.5 million more homes built over the next Parliament, with first-time buyers giving first dibs, getting the NHS back on its feet, 2 million more operations and NHS procedures to cut waiting lists, 700,000 new dental appointments, taking back our streets from gangs, drug dealers and fly tippers, with stronger policing and guaranteed paroles in town centres, opportunity for every child with free breakfast clubs in every primary school, more specialist teachers and better training and apprenticeships so that every young person is ready for work and ready for life. And making work pay through our new deal for working people, banning 0 hours contracts and outlawing fire and rehire. That is what a serious, united party can deliver. Mr Dowd, our country is crying out for change after the last 14 years of chaos. In just 94 days, we will have local and mayoral elections on the 2nd of May. Throughout the country, voters will be going to the polls for local councils and 9 combined authority mayors. Thousands of candidates of all persuasions will be putting themselves forward so that voters can give their verdict. They should all be commended, and the winners will have a mandate. That's more than this Prime Minister currently has, and this is why he should call a general election. No one voted for the 3rd Tory Prime Minister of this Parliament, not even his own party. He has no mandate. That is why he has no authority, and that is why the Tory soap opera continues. Rishi Sunak should have gone to the country when he became Prime Minister, but he denied the public their say. Bottling it again would hold the country in contempt, condemning us to more of this unnecessary, counterproductive Tory infighting. We need to have our say on the last 14 years. Do we want another 5 years like the last, of chaos, decline and failure? Or do we want real change and national renewal with a mission-driven Labour Party? This is the question when the election comes. The government should call a general election now so that people can have their say.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. I can see it's going to be a long year. We have plenty of time over the next few months to rehearse all of the points put across by members of the opposition, and no doubt some of the points that I'm going to put across from the government. But thank you for your chairmanship, and congratulations to the honourable member for Gower for moving this motion on behalf of the signatories of the E-petition, which calls for an immediate general election. Very grateful for the opportunity to respond on behalf of the government. I'm sorry to have to tell the honourable lady that the requisite authority has not been delegated to me at this time, and I am unable to grant her wish for an immediate election. But in the absence of such powers, I can refer her to what the Prime Minister has already said, that he is expecting a general election in the second half of 2024, so it could be as soon as 5 weeks, 5 months away, sorry, 5 months away. She'll be aware that, that the authority rests with the Prime Minister and with the King, but we will be having an election in 2024. The honourable lady from Aberdeen North asked for sunshine, I think, a ray of sunshine, and here I am, Mr. Chair, because there are extraordinary stories to be told from the course of the past 14 years. Better state schools, as judged by PISA, doing better in international rankings than ever before, thanks to the reforms and investment that we've made. Better apprenticeships, helping more young people earn whilst they learn, move into work. The best universities in Europe, sought after by many. Record employment, underpinned by an improved welfare system in the form of universal credit. More free childcare than ever before. A national living wage, same-sex marriage, 2 new aircraft carriers. The fastest decarbonisation of any major economy. Emissions still further to go, we appreciate that, but emissions down by over 50% since their peak in the 70s. Brexit delivered with global free trade deals, notably enormously important one with the Pacific. More money than ever before in the NHS. Record numbers of doctors and nurses. Neighbourhood crime down by 50%. 2.5 million homes. Better growth since 2010 than Germany, France, Italy and Spain. And, Mr. Chair, not just that. According to the IMF, they expect the UK to have better growth than Germany, France, Italy and Japan in the medium term. Last year, the UK overtook France as the 8th largest manufacturing nation on earth. These are all the result of choices, Mr. Chair. They are all the result of the decisions taken by a Conservative government since 2010. And has this Conservative government achieved it because it was handed a golden legacy by the previous Labour government? No. Not a bit of it, sir. When we took over, the economy was in the sewer. And since that time, we have managed to deal with the largest public health crisis in a century, with the largest war in Europe since 1945, the biggest energy crisis since the 1970s, the highest inflation since the 1980s, and still the projections for our country going forward are good. Confidence in our nation's economy amongst our international partners remains high. These arguments and more I look forward to taking to the electorate in the months ahead. And as I say, I look forward to rehearsing the back and forth with honourable members in the chamber and beyond.
Thank you. Tonia Antoniazzi to wind up.
And I'd like to thank the honourable members that have participated in today's debate. I was quite surprised that we didn't have a higher turnout because the demand is so great for a general election. But I understand that the Minister is not the Prime Minister, which is a great shame again, because we do need to have answers now. And I look forward to the next general election as a member of the opposition party, and I'm sure many, many more do. So thank you very much, Chair.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 641-904 relating to the next general election. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned. Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.